Welcome back, everybody. Michael, did you want to start?
Yes, hello. Welcome, everyone. And as this is our uh, first full public meeting, I'm just going to reaffirm some opening comments. And I want to start by thanking you all again for agreeing to serve on the Senior Fraud Task Force with us. And while we're here for a somber reason to, address a serious topic of fraud amongst our seniors and other vulnerable populations, I'm actually very excited to be here because we're in solidarity with a larger part of some unanimously passed bipartisan legislation that was brought forward by the great work of the Aging Committee and the Human Services Committee. And Connecticut over the last year has really made a strong decision that we care about our older adults. We care about our parents, we care about our grandparents and our loved ones. And the legislature made this recognition. And they brought forward a strong legislative package, which included this task force. And I want to take this opportunity to really thank the leaders of the Aging Committee, Senator Miller, Representative Phipps, Senator Kelly, and Representative Wilson, as well as the leadership of the Human Services Committee with Senator Moore, Representative Abercrombie, Senator Berthel, and Representative Chase. And it's through their work that we brought forward a number of very important bills that really affirmed our desire to really take care of our seniors. And it covers a wide spectrum, everything from early on age discrimination, all the way through to essential support persons, statewide visitation policies in our nursing homes, allowing our residents to use the technology of choice, and other really important bills that really showed the unified kind of will of the legislature to take a strong look and reaffirm that this is a really great place to age, and it's part of an overall initiative, which is we want to allow people to age well here in Connecticut and under the least restrictive means in the location of their choice. And so as part of that work too, I also want to give a special thanks to Representative Lucy Dathan for her work with the Ombudsman's work group. And they have similarly had a long-held understanding that we have of this vulnerable population, and that there's some simple things that we can do to really make sure that we protect them. And one of the really great things that came out of the meeting that was just yesterday that I think is really exciting is, as the state moves forward with its rebalancing initiatives, there's a lot of savings that have been associated with it. And in 2019 alone, from a DSS report, we've learned that the state saved $508 million just through this rebalancing initiative. In the last 14, $2.5 billion, and in the last 5 years alone, $1.7 billion saved. So there's room to really think about, how can we apply some of these savings? What are some ways that we can mirror and match the initiatives that we're doing up on the upper level when it comes to the Age Well initiatives, when it comes to things like making dementia-friendly neighborhoods and all of the work that we're doing with our municipalities. And another thing that came out of the Ombudsman work group that I think will be helpful going forward, and we'll work on getting it, is this concept of creating a diagram. So, we've handed out some resources, and I believe we're going to be discussing them today. That's a non-exhaustive list. There'll be more to come. But I just wanted to, again, thank you all for being here. And I look forward to everyone's thoughts and this discussion today. And I'm going to now pass it on to my co-chair, Joan. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. So The agenda for today, we really wanted to get a foundation of where things stand right now with the senior fraud, the laws that are against senior fraud. You know, according to the bill that was passed that created this task force, our job is to study ways to protect senior citizens from fraud. And our study shall include, but is not limited to, planning services available for Medicaid applicants. So we thought that one of the best ways to get started, because we're all coming from different professions, different life stories, is to really get a handle on what the law reads right now. Marie Grady, who is not able to be with us today, was kind enough to send over a list of statutes and a synopsis of those statutes, so that we can review that. And I'm hoping in our review and our discussion of what is currently on the books, we can start to explore where there are holes in the law, where we're seeing that maybe even as written, it's not protecting seniors, and talk about how we think the topics that we discussed last time could be better addressed through changes in the law, or beefing up some of the statutes that are on the books. We, at the end of the meeting, after we go through these laws and really get a good foundation for ourselves, we will also then present what the topics will be for each of the meetings that we agreed to at the last meeting. Our plan is for each meeting going forward after this one is one particular topic that we had agreed to at the introductory meeting will be discussed in depth. And we want to give everybody a heads up about when the topics will be discussed, so that if you have resources that you want to contribute, or if you have stories that you need to bring forward, or people that can testify to the particular topic, that you'll know when that is calendared to be discussed. So I'll let everybody know what those topics are and what the dates are, and we'll also send it around via email. We took the topics from what we had discussed last meeting and put those on the calendar. One of the documents that you received with the email that Joe sent around yesterday with the meeting reminder was not only the minutes from last time, which apparently we don't have to approve because that was just an introductory meeting. We have the agenda for today, but there's also a resources list, which Michael and I had worked on putting together and gathering what we thought would be helpful, but anybody is welcome to add to that. But the first thing on the resources list are the list of statutes that Marie had provided to us that are currently on the books for protecting seniors against fraud. So I don't know if anybody had a chance to look at that or open up the document, but if you wanted to now, you can see each of the statutes we put on there, and it has a link so you can actually open up the statute itself to read it. But Marie's email actually gave a synopsis. So I'll just kind of start going through that. And I'm hoping that this can be a discussion, so that if there are items that you believe are still issues for seniors, even though these laws might be on the books, please let us know, and we can start to develop the topics in even more greater detail in terms of how we think that things should change to better protect our seniors. So the first law that Marie had mentioned was 17A 412, 17B 452, and 17B 452A. And the synopsis is that DSS must maintain a registry of abuse cases, including financial exploitation cases, generally encompassing fraud. And then 17B 452A states that DSS will send an annual report on such cases to various committees. I believe that report was also included in the email, was it not? Okay. So I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that, on the fact that there already is an initiative for DSS to maintain a registry of abuse cases? Is there discussion about how those cases get to DSS? How do people report it? Are there holes in the system as far as reporting that? Do you think that there are things that are not being reported because people don't realize there's fraud, or they don't know that this is an option for them to report to DSS?
Absolutely. I think in some of the things we're going to be discussing, it's hard to know you've been defrauded if no one tells you, if you don't know the things that are out there. And even a lot of people, when they have been defrauded, are afraid to report it, whether it's because we're embarrassed by the fact that we got defrauded. It doesn't matter if it's someone younger or senior. People don't like to admit, I got defrauded. It happens on a daily basis, but I think there's a reason why a lot of investigations don't occur. And for seniors, I think there's actually an unfortunate reasoning why they don't report it, and it's because they're afraid of people that are going to say, oh my god, you can't, you were defrauded, but it's because you're older and we need to take away your rights. So I think we need to make it that it's a comfortable environment. It doesn't matter if someone's younger or older, people get defrauded no matter what, and we should make sure that they're not only aware that they might have been defrauded, but make it a safe place for reporting.
Right. Laura, did you have a hand raised?
Yes. I wanted to just comment that I think part of, I agree with what Steve's saying. I think another part of that is that I think there's a sense from my speaking with, various people in the community through the coalition that if you report, nothing effective happens. So why report it? And there's a whole conversation that could be, a whole separate conversation that could take place around that. And the coalition's, working, towards, educating law enforcement, and we're working in that regard. But, I think if people feel that it doesn't make any sense or it's not going to do anything to report, why bother? And I also think there's also a feeling that it might do more harm than good to report. I think along Steve's comments, if I report this, what's that fallout from that? And so, I think there's a little bit of both. I've heard that from police officers. I've heard that from other, people in the community saying, well, I didn't report it because why bother? It's not going to go anywhere. And I can't say that they're wrong sometimes. I think we do have situations where these cases are followed up on, but it's a resource, at least from my perspective, it's a resource problem because the Chief State's Attorney's Office doesn't have the staff to investigate these things. And if we send them to local law enforcement, they sometimes aren't educated enough to understand that these aren't all, a lot of the reasons we get is, oh, that's a civil matter. And they won't take it as a report, when actually it's a theft, it's a crime. So you really have to push to get the police to even take a report sometimes. So I think there's education needed and resources needed to be able to get that effective follow-up afterwards.
And do you think that we should be discussing it in terms of the difference between, a third-party professional, unrelated person versus family? I feel like there's two different avenues.
Yeah, and I think I recommended that, in our last discussion, that fraud is very broad.
Mm-hmm.
There can be fraud committed by strangers who are scamming the elderly, and I think, AARP does a great job of, providing education and information about those types of situations, but a lot of financial exploitation is committed by family members.
Mm.
85%. And in my experience, that is pretty accurate. You have family members who are taking money from their parents, aunts, uncles, whatever.
Right. Well, and I like
kind of two populations we're looking at.
Right. And I think, beyond the senior being concerned that if I report this now, I might get conserved, I might lose my rights. If there's the other layer of they don't want to report their own family too. So that adds another.
In my experience, that it's a major roadblock to prosecuting some of these cases because it's your child a lot of times. So, and it may be your primary caregiver. So what do you do if you report your primary caregiver, pursue this, and they go to jail and you no longer have a primary caregiver? Right. It's a reality for this population. So yeah, and the police typically, if they think that a older individual won't testify against their child, they won't pursue the case. It's still a crime and they still can pursue it, but they feel that they don't have a strong enough witness to, be successful in that. So the case gets dropped and the person really ends up getting away with it. And it does have this trickle-down effect where the person ends up having to apply for Medicaid. So they're on Medicaid, and it just snowballs into a really bigger problem.
Mm-hmm.
I believe we have Marie's hand, then Matt's hand.
Oh, go ahead, Marie.
Well, thank you. I want to address formal caregivers, those third-party individuals in the Connecticut Home Care Program, which is a Medicaid waiver. I would say on a monthly basis or so, we get a report from an elder or a person with disabilities, a younger person who has paid staff in their home, and there is an allegation or a report of someone stealing from them, someone using their credit cards inappropriately, or, in some cases, a report of some type of physical abuse or neglect. And often what happens is because of the delay in investigation, the police are brought in, a report is filed. In some cases, it's always reported to DSS through the critical incidents process. We then have to wait, and we're waiting for a court date, or we're waiting to find out if the senior and or their family is willing to pursue a criminal case against the individual. And the caregiver, in some cases, will leave their employ with one agency and move to be employed with another agency. So now, although they have not yet been found guilty, there is a significant concern about the efficacy of their care. And because they've left one agency and gone to work for another agency, they are now in the home of another vulnerable senior. And in some cases, the family or the elder is just, too riddled with either chronic disease or other health concerns to pursue the criminal case for that individual. And we have that same caregiver perhaps doing the same thing in another household. So I think it takes time for that DSS list to catch up. Sometimes things get lost because it's a criminal case that takes years to get through the court. We are dealing with some of the most frail and oldest individuals in the community, and sometimes the case outlives the client. So, and yet the caregiver moves on to the next case. So and sometimes this happens in a very slippery slope type way. The individual is counting more on the paid staff, now is giving them the credit card to go to the store to get groceries. They're allowed to get groceries. It starts with, they're just also buying their own groceries. Next thing you know, they're shopping and using the other individual's credit card, and it takes a long time. Maybe there's no family involved or limited family for anyone to recognize that there's a pattern here of fraud, abuse, and theft. So I'm wondering, if there's anything that we can do to look at. We have registries. We've got a lot of different agencies involved, consumer protection, when we're talking about non-skilled home care agencies that is supposed to have some oversight of the industry. We've got DSS, and then we've got the court system.
That's a great point. Was there somebody else? I see Anna's
There
hand.
was
but I think somebody
Matt
else.
next.
Oh, okay. Matt?
Yeah, thank you so much, Joan. To your question right away about holes in the system. I mean, if you look at this review of statutes, we seem like, and DCF isn't mentioned here, but we do have a strong body of law that covers, protective services for children and clearly delineated state agency, the Department of Children and Families, assigned to enforce those laws, and clear statutes concerning protective services for the elderly, and the Department of Social Services, assigned roles concerning implementing those laws. And for nursing homes and assisted living communities, body of law concerning federal and state law regarding the ombudsman program. But way less clear to me and much more fuzzy is protective services for adults between 18 and 65. And some number of years ago, it's just, Laura's an expert on this, so maybe she can opine, but it's just less clear. And I recall a few years back, we disbanded not a state agency, but a unit. I think it was the Office of Protective and Services for Adults. That might have been housed for administrative purposes. I don't know if it was an OPM or not, but in any event, that 18 to 65 population on this question of gaps or holes in the systems, I think is a question that maybe we should devote some time to. The second issue is this issue of resources that immediately is coming up in the comments that are being made. In other words, even with the existing body of law that we have for protective services for the elderly and the ombudsman, there seems to be a question of, do we have the resources to even get the job done now with the caseloads that we have? And I love Zoom. You can always see the head shaking, knowing whether someone agrees with you or disagrees with you right away, or whether or not you have said something that you thought was funny that nobody did. But in any event, there is this question of the amount of resources, but if you add this other set of facts to that resources question, and that's that we have a exploding aging population in Connecticut, and we are the 6th oldest state in the nation now, and we are going to be older, and our over 85 population is going to be considerably older going forward. And so, and we have a strong desire and very clear public policy goals that I believe everybody on this call supports, including me and the association I represent, to serve more and more people in home and community-based settings, and to honor their choice to receive services in those environments. But and we are making galloping strides in achieving those goals over the last 20 years, and we're going to continue to right size and rebalance the system. But the consequence of that would mean that we will be serving, and the government will be paying for, a lot more services in home and community-based environments. And if we recognize that we don't have the resources even to address the issues that are present now, then we need to be thinking about what is it going to take to bring these resources into the system when we're expanding our caseloads, maybe 2- and 3-fold. So I want to really put that question on the table right away. And then finally, question of the Ombudsman Office, very appropriately serving persons living in home and community-based environments, even adds the resources that would be needed to make these systems work, notwithstanding whatever laws are on the books now or need to be on the books going forward to protect adults between the ages of 18 and 64.
Thanks, Matt. Hannah, did you have a comment?
Yeah, just really briefly to piggyback off what both Marie and Matt said. kind of going back to what Marie said, another thing that we occasionally hear of is you have so many people who work in home and community-based settings that work under different job titles for different agencies, and they're overseen by different state agencies. So some are DCP, some are DPH, some are DSS. And I've heard from some consumers that there's a lack of communication between those agencies. So they might raise an issue to DCP, for example, and say, you know, I know that someone who's working as a homemaker companion regulated by DCP, I happen to know that after they leave my house, they're going and working under a different job title that's regulated by a different agency. And they might raise a concern to DCP and say, you know, I have a credible allegation against this person. I'd like to somehow inform the other person that I know that they serve. And what I've heard from folks is that there's not good, the agencies will say, we don't have a way to communicate that to another agency. So I think that's one issue that we've heard anecdotally from folks that might be going on. And then to Matt's point, I think it is really hard to separate a lot of this from some of the overall workforce issues that we see just across long-term care. I think there is a hesitation from folks, even if they are uncomfortable, you know, with somebody who's in their home or they have concerns, they would rather not lose the care than to flag some of these issues. So I think just agreeing with and expanding on what Marie and Matt have already said.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think, you know, that's what I see as the big hurdle as well. There are laws on the books, and getting the reporting is what's going to be important. And there's a lot of hurdles to that. There's the hurdle that the senior may not want to report it. There's the hurdle that even if they do report it, it's not being communicated to all the correct parties. There's the hurdle that the senior might not even realize that they've been defrauded. So I think a lot of this will be explored further in our topics, but I think that's really important, because if we sat here and said, well, this law is on the book and this law is on the book and everything is working as it should, then we might be able to close up this task force today. But clearly we need to really clean this up a lot. So I think that's really helpful. The next statutes that Marie Grady had given us was the statute that defines exploitation, including financial fraud. Another statute that it talks about the mandatory reporters and the training program that is required of DSS to help detect fraud. And a lot of these statutes are specific to DSS and developing a reporting system. So I don't know, Matthew, if you have anything that you wanted to add from DSS, but if not, that's okay.
No, I think that a lot of the statutory structure that provides for, you know, reporting into DSS, and certainly the investigations of, I think from the last report, the financial or the exploitation category is a little under 25% of the reports that come into the unit. I think one of the challenges, and kind of, you know, going along with what has already been discussed, is what DSS can do as far as going into probate and perhaps seeking a conservator, and aside from reporting to the state's attorney's office. I would be curious, and I don't know the numbers offhand, maybe someone else on the call does, but I'd be curious perhaps to hear from the state's attorney's office as to the numbers of what they view as, you know, from the cases that they receive, as to what they feel is reaches a level or appropriateness for prosecution. I think DSS initially faces a lot of the same challenges that the state attorney might, as far as cooperation, or uh, the agency is looking into contracting with forensic accountants to do some auditing along the lines of what the state's attorneys and attorney general's office does. I think that's certainly a knowledge base or an expertise that's been demonstrated. I believe that's something that was pointed out in the auditor's report, which I think they're, certainly that's timely and on point. So I know that's something that the Protective Services for the Elderly program is actively looking into right now. But yes, the laws are there as far as for mandated reporting. What the agency can do as far as investigation of fraud, and I think if there is forensic accountants and auditors that are brought on board, I think that certainly will enhance the ability for the DSS program to analyze these cases. But then as far as going forward with potential prosecution, which is to some extent perhaps some of the best deterrent, I'd be curious to hear from the state's attorneys as to their perspective as to there are challenging cases. I understand that, but as to how they view these cases on kind of their kind of scheme of overall priorities.
Okay, so thank you, Matthew, for that reflection, and we're totally in alignment, because I've already begun the process. I've reached out to the Deputy Chief State's Attorney to discuss this topic, and I believe we're going to be inviting them to come. One of the things that I wanted to kind of just distinguish, and I believe it's referenced in one of the handouts, but it's important for us to note, which is the distinguishment between mandated reporting and mandated training. So we have people who are mandated reporters, that'll include law enforcement and things, but we also have mandated training. And one example where that's really effective is something that our commission hosts, which is the Senior Fraud Exploitation Portal for CPAs and their training. And so that they're supposed to go and start to look for the signs of fraud, differences in behavior, differences in spending habits and things like that. And though they are not themselves mandated reporters, because they've taken this training, they're actually doing the reporting and they're making a difference. And it's being preventative, and it's getting things done in a timely fashion, so we can not have terrible outcomes and it's too late to do anything about it. And so that's something that we should think about as going forward, when we talk about that, because there's a lot of mandated reporters out there who are just kind of roped in. You are a mandated reporter, but what does that mean for folks? And again, that kind of leads to this paralysis that we were discussing before. And as far as other agencies, I agree. We've already now talked about DCP, DSS, the chief state's attorneys, the attorney generals. I'm also having a discussion with FLIS, which handles the licensing for facilities. I'll have that later this afternoon and see maybe if we're going to include them. And one of the things that I just wanted to highlight as far as the PSE audit report for all of our members is something that's super helpful. We can just do a keyword search, right? This is a PDF. You can do a keyword search communications, right? And then you're going to find a lot of these discussions, including recommendations, including feedback from other related agencies. So I just wanted to note that for our members, as the link for that is available in the resources document. And the last thing I just wanted to say is, now we've talked about fraud and we've talked about, kind of the definition of fraud, but we're also talking about the word exploitation. And I think they kind of are interlinked. And so there's a lot of things that happen once fraud occurs or exploitation occurs that leads to other aspects, including, waste and abuse. And so they're all they're all intermingled to an extent. But I think what we're doing now is we're kind of coming to this acknowledgement that, you know, the state, as far as the systems are currently set up, is usually to handle something after it's occurred, and then once it's occurred, does it meet the threshold? And we can take an analogy for, you know, misdemeanor theft, right? Yeah, I don't remember the exact threshold, but there's a difference between stealing something that's $1,000, $2,000, $5,000 with different penalties associated. And I think that's kind of like the threshold that we're talking about when it comes to actual prosecutions. But again, if we can intervene by having a neutral, non-mandated reporting body that knows all of these different enforcement opportunities, and the people know that, hey, I can reach out to them, I can talk to them. It's not like, okay, now we're going to file a police report on my own kid, right? Instead, it's like, oh, well, maybe this is a way that we can address it. So I just wanted to mention those things. And also, when thing that Marie was discussing with the formal caregivers, I'm definitely looking forward to having a discussion around this concept of the consumer employer, because there are a lot of responsibilities and liabilities that go along with that kind of lead to, again, more of this paralysis and uncertainty. Thank you.
We have Matthew's hand up.
Yeah, to follow on that, Michael, and also what Matt Barrett had said earlier, you know, with children, there are a lot of you know, eyes and ears on minors. You've got the school system, you've got pediatricians, you've got you know, others in the community that might be observant of certain actions, you know, abuse, neglect, others. I'd be along the lines of education and reporting and kind of a proactive approach to identifying fraud or financial exploitation. You know, perhaps a little bit more thought to those in the community who are interacting with our elders that may, and aside from obviously the family members, but those who might get a sense that that there could be a real problem. And I know you talk about for the CPAs and the training, maybe at seniors centers, others, as far as identifying concerning activities or behaviors where those people, whether they're mandated or not, may be encouraged to report things that are amiss. You know, it's been prior to coming to DSS, I worked with the Department of Health for 18 years in the prosecutorial unit, and I think a number of us here would sometimes see how our older population is really given not the due, frankly, respect and attention that is, you know, to be expected, and perhaps if there was just whether through training or other encouragement, to look out for you know, our older population and oftentimes vulnerable, cognitively or otherwise. I think that's something that can also be explored through the work that we do.
Thank you. We have Michelle's hand up.
Just to follow up with what Michael brought up and Matt, you know, being in a municipality and working with the social service directors in the state, what we find often when individuals call in and are concerned about abuse happening in the community. It's either a family member or it's a professional in the community who doesn't really understand their role as a mandated reporter. And they call us almost insecure about it, wanting to know what their role is and if they should report it, if it is abuse. So I just think it's a fantastic idea to have more opportunities for individuals to understand what their role is. A lot of times they don't know if they're a mandated reporter when they're not on the job versus on the job. So I think a lot of that needs to be made clear to them. And, if I could just add really quick too, and follow up with everybody, one of the biggest issues we are seeing in the state when we have our meetings with social service directors and municipalities is we do get stuck with adults ages 60 to 64. We can't call protective services. The police are doing the best that they can, and it all comes back to the social service departments. And, our hands are tied. We don't have anything that we can do for individuals at that age who don't want to report abuse or are self-neglecting, mental health, children, all those issues. We find we are stuck, and we're always asking each other for advice on the best way to handle it without any other support. So Matt brought up a wonderful point earlier about not having protective services for certain age groups.
So I'm just gonna also comment and reflect, because I've looked at this topic too when it comes to the distinguishing between protective services for the elderly and adult protective services. And while a lot of other states have them, Connecticut is focused on the elderly. And one of the reoccurring themes when this topic gets revisited is resources. And in fact, that it takes a lot of federal resources and federal involvement too to really kind of put together something that's very robust as far as being able to to have folks out in the field to be able to do work like that. And so it's interesting how they all fit together. But I think, as I was saying earlier, when we think about kind of the concept of rebalancing that's getting pushed, and we know that more and more and more that's the what's the decision of choice for a lot of our Connecticut residents, we know that there's going to be this growing need. And I think it'll definitely be therefore the most cost effective thing to again kind of look at this prevention issue so that we can deal with things early as best as possible, and where it's effective, make those different connections, whether it's to law enforcement or the Chief State's Attorney's Office or anything like that. Thank you.
Thank you
Hi,
very
I'm back.
much. Welcome
Sorry
back.
about that. Thanks. I don't think I've ever lost power at my house, except for right now.
There might be better connection if you turn your video off, so you don't have to stream that through the network.
Oh my gosh! So I didn't realize that happened. I'm sorry. So Joan, we were still kind of continuing on with where you left off. If you want to continue with the next point.
Okay. Yeah. When my power went, I know Matthew had just raised his hand, so I didn't catch his last comment, but I think where you touched a little bit, Michael, on the Commission on Women, Children, Seniors, and Equity and Opportunity portal. So I don't know if you wanted to talk any more about that, because that was the next statute on the list. Yes,
thank you. And I believe included in the resource document on the last page, I believe is the link to it. And this portal was created from a public back in 2015. And working together with the Department of Banking and the Elder Justice Coalition and others, and we have this is where the training video is housed for the CPAs as they go forward. And currently, right now, our commission is having discussions with other stakeholders about updating the information, and that's something that we're going to be doing going forward to 2021 into 22, and looking at different ways of highlighting updated information, maybe having it be in smaller bites or having other kind of related issues to it. And then also thinking about, like we were saying earlier, who else might benefit from learning for that? What other stakeholders in the community would be well served to just kind of go through this training? And I think one of the issues that's come up with it is that while the legislature has mandated this training for CPAs, as the compliance part of it is missing. So they kind of say, employer maybe keep track of who did it and what day, but as far as reporting to a specific agency, that's not yet enshrined in it. And it's something that we can think about. But I think as far as the effectiveness of it, what we should do is continue to grow this training portal and have it be a real educational opportunity, and maybe look at the folks that we were just talking about earlier, the people in the municipalities, the folks who aren't so sure about what they should do, and kind of have it be maybe a little bit more generalized or a little bit more tailored to what their needs might be, so that they can better understand what these warning signs are. And not, we can talk about whether or not we should have all of the infrastructure around, you have to send this annual report of every single person who's ever done it. I think having it up and having it posted, and it could naturally kind of proliferate through the various communities. And the more that we work on infrastructure like this in the field of prevention, the better outcomes we'll get, the reduction. And then we won't have to deal with this back end of, oh, well, we have all of these cases, but this one's at this threshold and this one is at that threshold, when instead perhaps there's ways that can have an intervention before we get to that part.
I think that's a great point too, because one of my biggest concerns is that there is just not a lot that is actually reported. So the training of professionals is I think a big part of it. How is it that the training was for CPAs? Where did that come from? Is that specifically from the statute, or was that something that your commission came up with?
I'm going to let Laura jump on that answer.
Okay.
So this happened back in 2015. At that time, I was working for the Department of Social Services, representing protective services. So I was involved with some of this. But what happened was there was a discussion about it's not CPAs, it's financial agents. I'd have to take a look at the definition. I don't have it in front of me, but the term that's used is financial agents. So it's not certified public accountants. It's
Pardon my misspeaking. Sorry about that.
Yeah, well, that's okay. That's all right. But there's a distinction there, and it's much broader when you look at the definition of financial agents. So there was a discussion about making financial institutions and financial agents mandated reporters. And in many states, they are mandated reporters of abuse. However, there was a compromise made because the industry was not keen on the idea of having their financial institutions and financial agents being mandated reporters. And what happened was they said, well, we'll agree to mandated training. And so at that time, the Commission on Aging, along with the Coalition for Elder Justice and the Bankers Association, got together and developed this training that's now on the Commission's website. And so I was part of that work group that developed the training. And we met several times, came up with the training materials and the video, and we were able to get that launched. And shortly after that, the Commission on Aging was disbanded. So that's sort of the history behind it. I think it's had a very interesting consequence over time when you look at the number of reports that come in to protective services for abuse. One of the highest reporters, I think second highest reporter of abuse are financial agents and financial institutions, and they're not mandated reporters, but they've been educated. So I think that goes to show that the education that they're receiving has been very helpful in being able to identify, maybe not even just financial exploitation or fraud, but also some of the other signs. They're trained to look at other things that may indicate that the person maybe be self-neglectful. There may be some sort of other abuse going on, because frontline staff at banks see older people, or at least they used to before COVID. Older people still went to the bank. So they were a really great resource for those observations. And I think the fact that there are so many reports coming in from financial institutions and financial agents just goes to prove that that education works. But when you look at other mandated reporters, a lot of them, when you speak to them, they have no idea that they're mandated reporters. And they don't know where to report. They don't know the process. And so I think that's sort of where there's a gap, is that we have mandated reporters, but they don't have mandated training. And then we have people who aren't mandated, or entities that aren't mandated, but they have the training and they're doing a fantastic job at reporting. So that's sort of my observation on how that's kind of played out over the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful. I remember when that law had gone into effect. I wasn't sure about the CPAs, but I think that's an excellent observation about the education. And I think you're also right that those bank tellers are also the people that are seeing. And that's an important part of what we have to look at, is who is actually going to be interacting with the seniors enough to be able to see that there's something that maybe should be reported, and where do they report it, and what should they be looking for. I think that education is key, as Michael mentioned, the mandated training versus mandated reporter, maybe what we have to look at and really figure out who in the community are the people that should be targeted, so that the seniors are, who they interact with are educated and able to say something about what they're seeing. Because if the senior doesn't know that they've been defrauded or is uncomfortable with reporting it, then it'll just go undetected, unless there's some professionals out in the community who are educated and know to report it.
Yeah, and statistically, for every one case of elder abuse, and this isn't necessarily specific to financial abuse, for every one case, 23 go unreported. That's huge, and very concerning. And I've also in my practice found that when there's one form of abuse, there's typically multiple forms of abuse. And if there's not necessarily abuse in the technical sense, financial exploitation or financial insecurity can lead to self-neglect, which is another, probably the highest reported concern that comes to protective services, is self-neglect. So, it really does have a compound effect on the older adults in our community.
Right. And I think somebody had alluded to this earlier too, as far as, the effects that it has on the state, and then people having to get on state benefits if they've been exploited and defrauded. So I think in terms of, the state looking at it, and the money that might have to go into training, it in the long run, it probably would save a lot too, if people are protected from the beginning and they're not ending up in a situation where their money has been taken, and then they have no means to be able to take care of their own needs going forward. So was there anything else that anybody wanted to talk to about that, the portal and the financial exploitation?
Marie has her hand up.
Okay, go ahead, Marie. I'm gonna try to log back on because my power came back on. So hopefully I won't cause any crazy noises. I'm gonna mute myself.
Thank you, Joan. I just wanted to add, through the Older Americans Act, we bring in millions of dollars to the state of Connecticut, and we've got 5 area agencies on aging, which are charged with taking those funds and allocating them out to nonprofits and other members of the aging network to support the needs of older adults. We're really lucky because we have Lara, and Lara is the head of, is responsible for oversight of the funds that come in for elder abuse, and in developing a coordinated effort to work. It's not a lot of money on the elder abuse side for whatever reason. That Title VII has never really gotten the funding that some of the other programs have, but each region has $10,000 that were given, that were allocated to make a difference in elder abuse. And it's such a drop in the bucket that no one has ever really figured out quite what should we be doing with this. So all of us have tried these little mini campaigns of awareness. And I know that we're not really talking about solutions quite yet, but I don't want to lose the thought or the idea that perhaps developing an educational program for mandated reporters in the community, working with Lara and staff at the State Unit on Aging and this task force and other people we would identify to create that same training that's working so well for financial agents in the community, and then using those 5 regional area agencies on aging who have relationships with almost all the home care agencies, the skilled, the non-skilled, the community resources, our senior centers, our social service and human service folks, the municipal agents, using those 5 to promote the training and to provide the training in the community with some sort of directory that we could keep track of who has been trained. It is complex. Finding protective services for the elderly, understanding the system of reporting, understanding who to report financial versus a physical abuse, whether the police need to be involved. It's very confusing. And even for, we have 3,000 Medicaid clients on the Connecticut Home Care Program, and another 1,000 clients who are younger through the acquired brain injury and the personal care assistance Medicaid waivers. Even for seasoned staff, we have to sometimes case conference and say, what's the best way to get help for these folks? So I don't think that it's people don't want to report. I do agree with some of the earlier speakers, including Lara, who said people either aren't aware of their role or don't know how to execute their role once they've identified some sources of abuse. But this could be an opportunity. And of course, I can't speak for Lara and how she's going to suggest we use those funds, but this is an opportunity. If we took those $10,000 in 5 regions, $50,000 and created an educational program and used it to support the learning, we would actually have a much better chance of making a difference here rather than that shotgun, oh, here's $10,000, let's make a bunch of flyers about it. What is elder abuse? So just a suggestion.
A great point. And it kind of leads me to a question. I know Lara said that you're finding that the bank tellers and non-mandated reporters are reporting a lot of the abuse because they have been educated. Is the education that they're getting the financial exploitation education that is through the commission's portal, or is it private from the banks? Do you know where they're getting this education?
I can, Joan, one of the things that is in the statute is that the training that's provided that was developed back in 2015, 2016, and is now on the commission's website. That was sort of an alternative for smaller institutions that maybe didn't have the ability to provide that training on a larger level. So if you're talking about, say, Bank of America or a larger bank, they can do their own training, and that's acceptable under the statute. It's for maybe some more the more local community banks. And I think that's where we wanted to be able to provide that resource for them. In the protective services audit report, I think, and this is of no fault of anybody on this call, is that because the Commission on Aging was disbanded and then combined with several other areas of advocacy for the legislature, that piece got lost. And so it was very difficult to find that particular link. And I think they looked to see how many times it had been accessed over the last couple of years, and it was very few. And actually one of the coalition members from the Department of Banking actually recently had gotten a couple of calls looking for the link because she had banks that wanted to access that training. And so coincidentally, we started looking at it and saying, okay, where is it now? What's it look like? It needs to be updated. And that's how we got connected with Michael. But so that's sort of being worked on, but it's not the only way that they can do the training. So I think probably 99% of the financial agents out there are probably doing an independent type training. I don't know what it looks like, but supposedly they're doing it. And to Michael's point earlier, there's no reporting of it. It's kind of, you document it someplace in your records if you're a financial agent that you conducted this training or you completed this training. And so one of the things I think Michael and Kathleen Titsworth from Department of Banking and I were talking about was potentially having some sort of certificate that they get, so it's documented that they actually completed the training, at least through the commission's website. And there's no follow-up to that in the statute. So nobody checks on this. It's kind of but I think it's working. The fact that we get so many, that DSS gets so many reports from the financial institutions, obviously they're doing it and they're following up and they're making reports. So that's a good thing. But whether we want to go so far as to say, okay, who's doing it, who's not, and let's make sure everybody does it, that opens up another issue of how do we monitor that.
And you have to wonder, why the banks are doing it privately. I would imagine that they're concerned about their own liability. So they have a financial incentive to train their people. And, if there's not otherwise that incentive, are other professionals going to be following through with that unless they're mandated to do so? And how do we pay for that?
It's a really interesting topic, because I was involved with protective services for about 10 years before I came to aging and disability services. And when I first started working with protective services, there was very little cooperation. There was very little, involvement from financial institutions 10, 15 years ago. And over time, they have become incredibly involved in this issue, which I think is a really good thing, both in Connecticut, but on a national level, they're recognizing, I think, like you have said, that there's a financial implication for them as well. They also, I like to think that they care about their long-term customers, and that they want to keep their customers' finances secure. So I think there's been a shift in a positive way from the financial industry. So that's a good thing. But when you look at other disciplines, it's a bit different when you're talking about mandated reporting, because there's a lot of other aspects to the relationships that those professionals have with those individuals. If a medical professional is going to have a much different take on reporting than maybe a financial institution. There's a lot of other aspects to take into consideration. So I'm just putting that out there as, I don't know whether we would be able to do a one size fits all type training for everybody
Right.
on elder abuse, but the financial piece we might be able to.
And I think that's a really good point. I think if we're looking at financial exploitation or financial abuse, the banks and the financial advisors that's their wheelhouse. That's what they're looking at anyway. When we're looking at other professionals who might be caring for a senior, they're focused on that care. They're not necessarily focused on the finances. So, I think we can, use the success of the financial advisor reporting, and maybe include that in the report, but for people who are not in the financial world, there might need to be some tweaks or maybe some streamlines for them so that they can continue to focus on the caregiving and not necessarily have to also shift and focus on financial exploitation. I think we need to make it as easy as possible for people to spot and report, and training would be key for that. The last, unless anybody else has anything about.
Michelle has her hand up.
Okay, sorry.
I just wanted to ask real quickly, and we can table this if we need to for next time. But Laura, I'm just wondering, when these calls come into PSE, how is each call handled and how much time is spent on them? If it's something that can be closed quickly and there's no abuse discovered, is it a quick process, or and also, is there a universal assessment tool that each department is using?
Matt, are you okay with me answering some of this?
Sure. I think sharing, you've over 10 years of experience, I think, absolutely.
Matt used to be my boss, so.
For a very short window.
Yes, I should just come downstairs and sat with you. So I can only speak from my experience. I have not been with the Department of Social Services for a year. So things may have changed in that year time span, but I can tell you what I do know. Typically, if an individual calls into protective services, they have a central intake line. The central intake line is answered by a unit of social workers. That's all they do, is take in these calls and assess each call based on the information that they're provided. Based on that assessment, they assign a priority to the case, meaning, depending how quickly a social worker needs to physically go out and visit the older adult. Again, it depends on the information that they're receiving, but based on that information, they assign it a priority level, and based on that priority level, they have a policy that sets out, timeframes in which they need to go out and do a home visit. Home visits are done unannounced for obvious reason, and depending on the complexity of the situation, it could be a quick visit. Maybe the individual just needs some resources. The social worker goes out, does an assessment. To my knowledge, there is not a set assessment tool. I do think they have certain information that they have to gather. I know, at least from a legal perspective, I always ask them for very specific information, especially if we were going out to, go for conservatorship or something like that, but they should be doing a capacity evaluation. They should be assessing whether the individual has their basic needs being met. In other words, do they have food, shelter, clothing, healthcare, and are they safe? Pretty basic. Doesn't have to be perfect, because we also want to, or the Department of Social Services wants to respect that person's individual, independence and their right to self-determination. And so it doesn't have to be a perfect situation, but if those needs are being met and the person has capacity, then, I think those are the basic things that they look at in a visit. If the person needs resources and they're willing to accept them, the social worker can arrange for that with them. We have clients or individuals who do not want the services. And if they're competent and that's their choice, then they can make that choice. And I think sometimes that's where the public gets frustrated with protective services, because they're like, oh, you didn't do anything. Well, people have rights. And so they have the right to say, I don't want, the services that you're offering to me. The more complex cases where there's family dynamics, where there's financial exploitation, those can take a long time to resolve. And especially if you have to go to court, if you have a person who lacks capacity and they need to petition the probate court for that, that can take months just because of the process that's in place. Because you have to go to medical evaluation, you have to, petition the court. It takes time for things to get filed and hearings to get scheduled. So I guess my quick answer would be, it depends. But, I want to say probably a lot of the cases that they're able to go out on are maybe quicker cases, because they find somebody who needs some resources, doesn't know that they're available. They're able to provide those resources and then close the case. Does that answer your question?
And certainly, I think it would be, useful at a future meeting. We can have the director from Protective Services come and talk, perhaps in particular, as to some of the challenges and processes in the financial exploitation cases or misappropriation cases.
I can say from my time at DSS, one of the biggest frustrations is that neither myself nor the social workers are accountants. And we did on occasion ask for forensic accountants in the past, and that was not granted. This was years ago. I remember saying, look, you guys aren't accountants. I'm not an accountant. And we get banker's box full of, documents to evaluate. That's not really our area of expertise. If we had a forensic accountant, it probably would have been a much different situation. Because that information, at least from a legal standpoint, if you're trying to prosecute a case, is essential. And they don't have that right now. It's something that I'm glad to hear that they're working towards.
Michael, did you want to say something?
Yes. So I just wanted to direct the members from the email that Joe sent yesterday, the document PSE Legislative Report Calendar Year CY 2020. And on page 10, it has dispositions of reported abuse allegations. And it's interesting because it's a nice graph breakdown. And just to add a little data to this discussion, for the calendar year for 2020, there was a total of 11,789 cases that PSE investigated. 21% or 2,513 were substantiated. 46% were not substantiated, which is about 5,400. And then the remaining 32 were cases of self-neglect. And immediately below that, there's a kind of a comparison of types of cases, and it's broken down by abandonment, emotional abuse, exploitation, neglect, physical abuse, self-neglect, and sexual abuse. And it shows the totals of amounts reported for the calendar year for 2019 and 2020. So I just wanted to point that out to our members if they wanted to pull up that PDF on page 10.
Thanks. I did want to point out also, one of the topics that had come out of the last meeting was how we could bolster PSE. And so that will be one of the topics that we have in our agenda. So hopefully we can get some more detailed information on that and how we can help there. The last, or actually there's two more statutes. One was 21A-3A. Department of Consumer Protection is charged with developing a public awareness campaign to help seniors recognize scams. So that's, I don't know if anybody has any experience with that, with what has happened with that statute and that charge, if that's working, if that needs to be increased. In my opinion, I don't know if the seniors know all the scams that are out there, but they certainly know about a lot of them. Is that something that you have want to talk about at all, Anna, from AARP's point of view?
Sure. So we do a lot of work through our Fraud Watch network, both at the state level and then nationally, to educate folks about just types of scams generally, but then we also do a lot of work about emerging scams to let folks know, there are new ways that people are targeting older adults through their scams. We've seen a lot in the past year. There's actually a great NPR report about it a couple of days ago about romance scams, for example, and just all the ways that people take advantage of new and emerging situations. So how were scammers taking advantage of the pandemic? How were scammers taking advantage of the emergence of dating apps? So we try to first of all, engage our membership in identifying and tracking some of these scams as they come up, locally and then nationwide. And also just making sure that older adults are aware of, these are some of the common types of ways that people target older adults. There are a lot of scams around Social Security, for example. So, just providing information about, the Social Security Administration isn't going to ask you for gift cards. They're not going to ask for envelopes of cash. They're not going to bully you over the phone. So we do a lot of work promoting that sort of general awareness, and it is really effective, because I think if you even just planting small kernels of knowledge to folks and letting them know this is a way to spot something that could potentially be harmful to you, and here's what to do if you have identified a potential scam, I think is really empowering for folks. And our volunteers get so excited about sharing this information and developing an expertise in this area. And I was sort of thinking of that piece, when the conversation earlier was talking about some of the mandated reporter trainings, because that really is what it takes for folks, is the awareness of potential harm, and then that secondary step of what to do when you've identified it.
And just to piggyback off of that, Jackie, thank you very much. She had sent an article, 7 Ways Fraudsters Reach Out to Rip You Off. There was an AARP article that was just from a few days ago, which was included in the resources document sent out. And as we review this list of statutes, we got to keep in mind that it's non-exhaustive. A lot of the statutes we're looking at today are civil, but there's a number from the 53 coded criminal statutes that we haven't discussed, including a lot of telephone fraud statutes, criminal statutes that are in there too. And I'm only mentioning it now just so that there's awareness that there's a number of criminal statutes as well that kind of intersect on this topic. Jackie.
Yes, thank you, Michael, for mentioning that. I was, and I'm so glad to hear you say that, because that actually was one of the comments that I wanted to make. You know, I think about going back to the name of our task force, to protect senior citizens from fraud, and we have spent a lot of time on ways that we're mitigating it after fraud or abuse happens. But I don't want us to lose that all of these ways that we've talked about means that already someone has been defrauded in a way. And I want us to keep in mind that we also have to remember the preemptive piece, where we have to address education and volunteerism and those things that will prevent us from getting to all the other things that happen in reporting. So Anna, I'm glad to hear you say that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think you know, folks have alluded to this as well in their comments, but I think when we engage older adults as self-advocates, I think that's a really powerful thing. It's not just how do we train other people to take care of older adults. I think we need to reconceptualize what the abilities of older adults are. And in a lot of cases, they are their own best advocates, but they need that information, and they need to you know, understand what to do when because a lot of times people know when they're uncomfortable. People know, you know, when they're having a bad experience, but it's that piece around letting folks know that there are ways you can act on that discomfort.
And if I may, I want to jump on that piece. I totally agree with you both, Anna and Jackie. And I think about it, you know, as we talk about one of, you know, the main goals of the application process for Medicaid, you know, I was wondering about like simple things that we could do with the understanding that a lot of folks are going to be choosing to be home-based. Once someone is a new recipient, maybe we should just, you know, mail out to all of them a trifold, know all your rights. You know, here's, you know, for example, if we do develop a LTSS ombudsman, you know, here's this person, know your rights. You're going to be a consumer employer, so you have your own responsibilities, obligations, liabilities, and things like that. And I think if we tell them that right up front, right from the beginning, and you know, do it in paper so they receive it in the mail tangibly, which a lot of people still, you know, do, and then have those kind of materials developed and in plain language, right? And that's one of the other things I really want to get into also. And Marie was talking about this, the great work that the precedent's already been set as far as reworking some of these applications, seeing if we can find better language for them to make them easier to understand. But I think, again, capturing that in the beginning instead of later at the end, and spreading that awareness and doing it real simply. Oh, here's your paperwork as your one of the very first things you receive. Know your rights. You're going to be a consumer employer now. Here's what you can do. Here's some good resources. Here's where you can, if you have questions and you're not sure, here's where you can call. Things like that.
Yeah.
Michael, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Marie.
I just wanted to mention that anyone who's applying for long-term care Medicaid, so in most cases, that's our older adult population, looking at long-term Medicaid, receives something called Rights and Responsibilities. And within that document, it is a 2.5-page document, and it's not necessarily the clearest in terms of, you know, having someone perhaps with some literacy problems understand their rights and responsibilities, but they are actually required to sign off to say that they received it. And if they are in any of the Medicaid, Connecticut's Medicaid waivers, the Department of Social Services requires their sign off, and the care managers, the social workers and nurses who are enrolling these folks, do a pretty good job of explaining their rights and responsibilities, how they can complain, any issues concerned with the help that they're getting, their formal supports, whether or not their preferences are being included in the care plan. I think, again, it might be something that we could look at making sure it's clearly understood. But to Jackie's point about let's try and prevent this before it happens. This could be, you know, having that conversation with the older adults. My office gets complaints about fraud and neglect of older adults almost every single day. And the best advocates are other people in a senior housing complex, in an assisted living, other older adults in the community saying, I don't like what I'm hearing from apartment 2A. So I think Anna and Jackie are absolutely correct. We need to make sure people are, number one, understand that that's potentially abusive if someone's being yelled at all day, or if someone doesn't have access to the food they want because someone's not allowing them to use their money that way. And number two, how to navigate the complexities of reporting, where to report, where you can just have that conversation. I think something's going on, but I don't know what the next step is. So important.
Yeah. I completely agree with all of you. I mean, and I think that's part of the reason why the Department of Consumer Protection is so important as part of this, because the education needs to go out to the community as a whole. And you know, just talking about mandatory reporters worries me because, like I think Laura had mentioned, these people might not want to report, and they have the right to not pursue that. So to have somebody have to report on their behalf is kind of troubling too. So there are plenty of people who are capable of making their own decisions, and they have to be educated just as much as the professionals who are out there seeing things for the people who might not be capable of reporting their own issues. So I think as far as the rights and responsibilities list, things like that, along those same lines as helping the caregivers, making things easy to understand, a checklist of here's your rights and responsibilities, I think really could benefit everybody, and just, you know, keeping the education going, and, you know, figuring out the different avenues that people are going to get this education. I think that's probably one of the hardest things. We could come up with what they need to know and what the easy checklists are, but figuring out how people are going to get this information is difficult, because there's so many different ways that people apply for Medicaid, or people hire a home care agency, or, you know, all the different things that could go into it.
In addition to that, Joan, if they say 65 to 70% of the population is also a visual learner, not just having checklists or it in writing, but actually, you know, potentially doing video clips of these are ways to spot scams, because people learn better from short sound bites. So I think a video clip, you know, you have 2-minute, 3-minute video clip actually gets the point across far better than a 2-page piece of paper. It could say the exact same thing, but the video clip will get more response and more traction.
Yeah, or just get a different people learn different ways. That's a good point too.
Yeah, I want to echo that. I really love that idea, Joan, that you mentioned in the first meeting too, and you just reiterated about the checklist. And Steve, I totally agree with you with the visual learners and the video clips, and that's been part of our discussion with the financial exploitation portal, and looking at different ways of doing it. What is this concept of the podcast? We have our long-term care ombudsman program has been putting out some really great informative things, and maybe there's new ways to kind of spread that information. You know, another thing that we really need to keep in mind or thought for is our diverse populations in this state. And, you know, for example, last week I was invited to the Disability Rights Connecticut had a launch party, and they had their invitations in all these different languages, including Vietnamese, right? So what we want to do is make sure when we take our asset-based approach, and when we have all these different great agencies, and I know the Attorney General's office has also similarly been working on putting out you know, in conjunction with the Elder Justice Coalition, different materials in different languages, and having that stuff prepared as far as like this foundational stuff, knowing your rights and responsibilities, that 2.5-page form, let's redo it. Let's have it available in different languages too. And it's something that's doable. It's not a heavy lift to do, to have a few of these standard forms to let them know that there's resources out there, and all of these different assets that Connecticut has, which are these different agencies that we work with, and that kind of form this healthy ecosystem, and make sure that we're taking care of our populations who having English as their primary language. Thank you.
Okay, so it's 11:30 now, and I think we got through all of this, the statutes at least that were on the resources list. As Michael mentioned, there's plenty more, but this is what we had to start with. So what I'd like to do, unless somebody has anything else to say about the law as it stands now and concerns, is go through the dates that we have coming up and the topics that will be discussed, so everybody knows what the topics will be. So if you have particular resources or speakers that you would like to bring forth to the meeting, you know when that will be discussed. Is there anything anybody else wanted to say before we moved on to that?
Joan, would you like me to share my screen, which has the dates that you sent me?
Sure, that would be helpful. Does anybody else have anything before we go on to that? So we took the topics that were discussed at the first meeting and then split them up and put them into the dates that we had agreed to. So we agreed that the first two meetings will be more about the point of entry, which is the Medicaid application itself. So we'll be talking about Medicaid planning services and the Title 19 application process. One of the specific things in the Public Act was that we were to talk about Medicaid planning services. So, and then I think Marie had brought up how to make the application process itself a little bit easier. And I think that those two things kind of go hand in hand. And so we're going to talk about those two at the first meeting. And I believe Steve has secured a speaker for December 2nd to talk about that. And we're also working with an attorney who has some clients that have gone through some problems with the process as it is now. And she may come and speak to us about what she's seeing in the community and how it's affecting the seniors. There is also in the resources list some of the other states' opinions, because this is a national problem right now, and other states are ahead of us in terms of trying to correct it and protect the seniors. So there are some links in there, but we'll go into more detail about that on November 18th and December 2nd. And December 16th is the community ombudsman. I don't know if Michael, if you want to say anything about that at this point.
Simply that I've begun discussions with our long-term care ombudsman to invite her, and I've also begun discussions with Representative Lucy Dathan, who's been running an ombudsman work group and really has a lot of wonderful resources and has had already a lot of really great discussions that I think are going to be on point. So we may invite her as well.
Okay. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we had the topic of, I think that Lara had brought up at the last meeting about reviewing ways that we can bolster PSE. We put that on for January 20th, and then we have one day where we have dedicated to a public hearing if there's anybody in the public who wants to come forward. I think Laura has a question. I don't think that we've necessarily settled on the scope of fraud. No, Laura's question was, have we settled on the scope of what fraud we are focusing on? Other than these particular topics.
So Joan, I just had a question, and Michael, on maybe a little bit more of what the thought was with respect to the Medicaid planning services discussion.
That was the original language in the Public Act to discuss different ways that the community is being exploited with Medicaid planning services. So that's really what's been going on nationally with the various state opinions. So we're going to be discussing where the community is potentially being exploited or defrauded, or there's issues in the system that's causing people to not be able to qualify for benefits programs or not be able to retain the assets that they're allowed to retain because they're not getting proper advice. So that's really where the topic is going to land for the Medicaid planning services. That's one of the areas where I think sometimes it's an unknown that the community member may not even realize that they've been exploited or they haven't been able to retain because there's not proper advice and proper guidance a lot of times.
Matt, you had a question?
Yeah, well, actually, I want to be sure I'm weighing in at the right time. I do have comments on and suggestions for the first two topics. Should I hold them or raise them right now? Because you haven't gotten through all the list yet.
I think we're done. What do you mean with the topics list?
Yeah. Are you done?
Yep.
All right. Well, just in terms of the first two meetings seem like they deal with topic 1 and 4, the eligibility process and the Medicaid planning services. And so I guess my comments or suggestions deal with one, the resources documents that we might be able to review in advance of those two hearings. And then I have some suggestions about who we should hear from on those two subject matters as well. And so the first thing, what's been provided is a whole list of opinions regarding the unauthorized practice of law from various states. And by the way, on those subjects, I have not read all those, but I did read a thoughtfully written blog post by, I think, a well-respected, intelligent elder law attorney, Carmine Perry. And he summarizes this is the Florida one, and that might be helpful if people didn't want to comb through all of those legal opinions. Would be just to take a look at Attorney Carmine Perry's blog post summary of the Florida. Well, I should say that I'm not sure that his well-written and summary addresses the issues in those other states. But my first question there for the resource page: is there any similar Connecticut-specific advisory opinion that has been reviewed or written? And if there were, could that be included on the resource document page in advance of the two hearings? And I'll just go through my list. I was just making notes as we were going along. And this pertains more to item number 4, but I think 4 and 1 seem directly related. I think the resource page should include the background on the Connecticut Legal Services lawsuit against the state of Connecticut regarding, at least in the state's opinion, the violation of federal law regarding the standards and timelines for processing Medicaid applications, and I think it was a stipulated agreement, and any additional information that might be available regarding that rule. Central to this question on the eligibility determination process is what has been characterized as long and harmful delays in the eligibility determination process. And since the now disbanded Commission on Aging has been mentioned a few times, Marie-Ellen and I were serving together on the advisory committee a while back when the issue was so severe that we had to sort of band together home care providers, skilled nursing home providers, advocates, and get a meeting with then Commissioner Bremby to really elevate our concerns about how harmful it was, these huge delays in the eligibility determination process. And I really don't know where we stand on that right now, but I think it would be really helpful to take a good look at the legal services lawsuit and the disposition of that lawsuit, and maybe even hear from somebody from legal services during the first two hearings about their opinions about the Medicaid eligibility determination process. The next set of issues I had was, very quickly, I'm going to go through these, was in terms of, we've talked about, the body of complaints and where they reside, and what we can learn from that. And what was mentioned, we mentioned the Attorney General's office and and I'll link these two together, the Attorney General's office and the Department of Consumer Protection. Is there any information or any background or anything in writing concerning complaints made concerning the Medicaid planning agencies to either the Attorney General's office or to the Department of Consumer Protection? And since those would be perhaps public documents, can we learn anything about that if that's the case? And then going off from that is at the Department of Social Services, were there any these would be public documents in my view. Is there any information about fair hearings and fair hearings where it was determined that misinformation, either from a third-party Medicaid planning agency, or very frankly from a member of the Connecticut Bar or any other entity, sort of led to a period of ineligibility or a denial of Medicaid eligibility? I know that the Hearings Division keeps track of a lot of these cases. I know recently they discussed with me cases concerning data they had regarding the question of fair hearings related to involuntary discharges from nursing homes. So I know DSS has this data, and it'd be important to know whether or not and to what degree these complaints are being made in the fair hearing process, and then learning about how they were evaluated and what was the disposition of them. And maybe we even ought to hear from the Department of Social Services specifically on either the first two hearing dates to sort of fully get our arms around this Medicaid eligibility determination issue. And so I guess those are my main issues. I'd like to see some more information that we can review in advance of those hearings, and then broaden up the speakers that are included there. And I also wanted to specifically offer to contact the senior planning entity that I'm most familiar with. And I disclose this publicly, but I think it's always important to disclose these matters to my colleagues on the task force. Is Senior Planning Services is a business affiliate of the Connecticut Association of Healthcare Facilities. And so I'm most familiar with their work in terms of providing senior, or what we would characterize as Medicaid application assistance or Medicaid planning services. And I'd be happy to invite their participation as a speaker to one of the first two meetings. So in addition to the attorneys that might be attending, Senior Planning Services could come and talk about their role in this process, what they're doing and what they're not doing, at least from their perspective. And I hope that that would better inform the work of the task force if we could include my recommendations.
So Matt, wow, thank you. That was a great, robust feedback that you just gave, and so a couple reflections. Just going back to the resources first, the article that was added on called "The Unlicensed Practice of Law and Medicaid Planning" by John Fraser is really good. I would definitely recommend people take a look at that one as well. One of the issues that comes up with this topic of the waiting period is this concept of presumptive or presumed eligibility. And that's something that has a fiscal note, but there's also, it's almost like when we talk about it, it's almost like one of the safety nets. We can frame it in that way. And so when I said back in the beginning of the discussion, when we consider the savings, which is now in 2019 alone, over $500 million, I think there's opportunities there to kind of reinvest in prevention work, investing in making sure that we can address these issues in a new and unique way that kind of stems off at the beginning, or that rather than having to deal with it afterward through the hearings and fair hearings and who speaks at those. There was a lot of really great information in those handouts. And regarding these entities that help with seniors and planning in their services, you know, a part of the literature also discussed in some of the states this concept of a licensed versus unlicensed one. And you know, when we go back to the federal regulations, a program like Choices is federally allowed, and there's rules built into it, and part of that has to do with the fact that those advisors don't receive any compensation from the people that they're advising, and that's what makes them so powerful and so federally authorized. So when we talk about, you know, the folks that we're worried who are out there who are kind of hanging a shingle, so to speak, in other states they have this concept of whether or not this person is licensed or unlicensed. So that's something we can maybe think about as we go forward too. And okay, yeah, that's it for now.
Thank you, Matt and Michael. If there's anything that anybody wants to submit, just send it to me or Michael or to Joe, because, you know, we're just adding things to the resources list. As I mentioned earlier, Michael and I had started putting this together, but it's not an exhaustive list. So I know Jackie sent us that article that we put on there, so you can certainly send us information. So it's 11:48 now, and I don't know if anybody has anything else they want to mention about the topics or questions or concerns about the scheduling of it. Okay.
If I could just make everyone aware, we have a website on the Connecticut General Assembly website now. If you go to cja.ct.gov and under the Aging Committee, there's a task force area there where I can upload documents, agendas, minutes, and the members list is available there.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Yes, and again, a big shout out to Mr. Clerk Joe Perkis. Thank you so much again for helping us to administer that. I want to take this moment and acknowledge you and your work as we go through this process. We're going to also be drafting a report too, so that'll be fun. We'll get to work on that together, all of us, and I'm really excited about it, because while the timeline is abbreviated, I think that with the upcoming session in February, I think we've covered a lot of really wonderful, in-depth, meaty topics that we can kind of dive into and bring forward some wonderful proposed new concepts for legislation. So I really want to take this moment and thank each of you for participating in this today. And this has been a very robust discussion, and I'm, you know, very delighted with how it's going. Thank you.
Great. Okay, unless anybody has anything else, I think we can end 10 minutes early today.
All right, thank you so much, everybody.